up to page Kafches, the 12th of the 13 Midos. And this one is Asher Nishbato Lavoisenu, which you have sworn to our fathers. So the Ramak is going to show to us that this idea of swearing, making an oath, God's taking an oath to the fathers is also a single, separate, individual attribute of divine mercy. Let's see how it works. Yesh b'nei Adam she'enam hagunim. There are people who are not upright. I don't know, there's probably a better word for hagunim. But in any case, there are these people. They're not hagunim. They're not upright. They're not straight, good people. Yeah, not in the up and up. V'kadosh Baruch Hu mirachem al kulam. But God has mercy on all. Even on these people who don't deserve it. Uperashu b'Gemara, and it was explained in the Gemara in Masechet Brachos, Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. V'chanoisi es asher achoin. I will have favor upon those who I show favor. It's a bit difficult to understand. What does it mean? I'll show favor upon those who I have favor. In other words, of course, if God favors them, He'll show favor to them. And if He shows favor to them, of course, then that is considered to be, it can be an indication that He favors them. What's the pshat? Rachamti asher achem v'chanoisi es asher achon. The Gemara there is talking about how Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to know God's ways. Hareini es darechecha. Hagad, show me your ways. And Hashem said to Moshe, Lo yirani adam v'chai. No person can see me and live. So seeing God in this level would cause a person to die. The other side of it is that only after a person dies could a person really see the level of understanding that Moshe was asking to receive. And at that point, God says, you can't see my face, but you can see macharai, you can see behind me. So the verse is talking about how God placed Moshe in a crevice of the rock and said, wait for me to pass by, and as I pass by, I'll put my hand over the crevice so you won't be able to see me. And then when I pass, I'll remove my hand and you'll be able to see from behind me. It's very strange. God has a face, God has a backside. Moshe could see, he has a hand. It's all, of course, it's all very, allegorical. But the point is, right, the panim, in Hebrew, the word for face is panim. Panim. And panim would seem to be a plural word. Panim. Faces. One's face is really faces. It could be on a certain level. A person's panim is really the kaleidoscope of the different aspects of a person's personality and thoughts, which all come out upon one's face. I think I remember reading once that there are more like muscles or muscular, whatever's behind the muscular apparatus in one's face than there is in any part of the whole body, maybe even more than the rest of the whole body can. And the point is that there's a huge amount of muscular fibers in one's face, the relatively small place in one's face than the whole rest of the body. And because the arm really just has to move, however it moves, but the face has a tremendously huge, complex variety of expressions of movements to make, expressing emotion and thoughts, and the face moves in such subtle ways that sometimes it's just like the smallest twitch of a lip, which can reveal a person's feeling. And sometimes the face moves in such subtle ways that we perceive how other people are feeling without even moving their faces at all, without physically perceiving but in the slightest movements, the cheeks can become more full, the mouth can drop, the ears can raise. I mean, it's a whole combination of many, many different movements in the face, which all come into this kaleidoscope of emotion that the face. So perhaps one reason in Hebrew, right, the face is actually referred to in the plural is because a person's face shows such a multiplicity and has such versatility in showing all of these different types of emotions and feelings and so forth and so on. But more significantly, panim comes from the word panim, which means internal. So that a person's face actually shows the internal mechanism of what's going on in that person's heart, or in times that person's psyche, in terms of that person's emotions and that person's thoughts. So the eyes are like a window to the soul, we say in English. That's what the panim is. The panim shows what's going on in the inside of a person. Can't really look at a person's limbs and see what's going on inside of a person. I mean, there's of course such a thing as body language. If a person's sitting with his arms crossed, or his arms loose to his side, or standing to the side, or hunched over, all types of things regarding body language. But more than anything else, the face is like the telltale window into what's going on into a person's interior. A person can try and hide that and conceal what's going on. But generally speaking, when a person is at rest, when a person is not trying to make a bluff or show or cover things over, you can really see what's going on the inside through their face. And therefore, the face is called panim because it reveals the innermost essence of a person. Therefore, when Moshe was asking to see God, God said, on the level that you want to see me, which is my panim, my face, meaning my pnimius, my internal essence, lo yiranim dam v'chai. No person can see and understand, comprehend, have any vision whatsoever of my internal essence and live. If a person were exposed to the essence of God, he would cease to exist. The intensity of that reality, the intensity of that spiritual plane, would cause a person to die. On the other hand, after death, a person can start to see closer and closer more of the essence of God according to the condition to which a person accustomed himself when he was living. He'll be able to see commensurately more and more of God after dying. So Hashem says to Moshe, you cannot see my face. You can't see my face because my face is representative of God's essence. That you can't see. But when I pass, meaning I'm going to interact with the world through time, and you'll not be able to see my face, but you'll be able to see a machorai, the backside, the wake. You'll be able to see my wake, which means, of course, not that God has a backside, but you'll not be able to see my essence, but you'll be able to see my wake. You'll be able to extrapolate something about me based on what you perceive from what results after I've gone by, after I've gone within the world. So the events of the world, the events in a person's life, can be viewed retroactively as a way of extrapolating back to something about God. So that's one meaning of what these verses mean. Moshe wanted to see the panim, the face. It doesn't mean the face, it means the inner essence. And God says, no, you can't see the face. You have to see from behind me, which doesn't mean, of course, God's backside, but what it means is the wake of God's having interacted with the world. And therefore, Hashem puts him in the crevice on hold, right? Putting his hand with his instrument of action in between him and God's essence. Yeah? So that you cannot see God's essence. You can only see God's hand, God's way of interacting with the world. And even when that's happening, you can't know anything about God himself. But when God passes, a person's able to view and see what happened and try and extrapolate something about God's essence based on the way we perceive the actual world. And the Devorah says that God wears tefillin. Of course, it's also allegorical. The Gemara discusses there what's in God's tefillin and so forth and so on. But one source suggests that what Moshe saw behind God was the knot of his tefillin, as it were. So that God went by and he saw, right, the knot coming around from the straps and then going down, the knot of the tefillin. And that, I think, fits into what I was suggesting here as well, which is that if we spoke about how the keser, which includes chokhmah, bina, and das, is symbolized in the human skull, being the keser, and then the left hemisphere of the brain being the Chokhmah and the Bina, and the brainal stem being Das, the juncture of the brain stem and the rest of the midos in the body, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, is right there. Right there, at that juncture where we place the knot. So that knot being in that place signifies the essence of God in Chokhmah, Bina, and Das being a attribute as opposed to a faculty beyond our comprehension. That's all encirculated within the essence of God, the Chokhmah, Bina, and Das of Hashem. God's essence or intelligence or reason for doing things. What we see is a knot. We can't go any further than that. It's closed for us. It's like a closed aperture. But the straps of the tefillin come down. That's describing the influence of Chokhmah, Bina, and Das coming down into the lower spheros, which are not faculties, they're attributes, midos of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus, the attributes by which we can see God, and therefore try and extrapolate back beyond the knot, which is closed to us in terms of being able to conceive of it, but only to conceive it, but only using those straps to kind of work our way back and extrapolate something about it. So I think that's another message here. God's face, where the tefillin are, the Chokhmah, Bina, and Das, that's something which we can't see. But we can see that because that's in the realm of God's essence, the realm of God's faculties. But we do see the knot beyond which we can't go. It's closed for us. We can see the influence coming down and try and extrapolate back. Yeah, what were you going to say?
Just it seems like there's a parallel. I'm not sure if it really matches, but the concept of picking from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for that day you will surely die, and how like knowing that knowledge is being like almost like understanding God better. It seems like there's kind of a correlation of like trying to understand God or see his truth will kill you, even though it doesn't happen directly.
Right.
Is there a correlation? Do you know? Or?
Very interesting correlation. Yeah.
But it would seem if you really understood God, you'd die immediately. There's no.
Yeah.
Like with Adam, he still lived for whatever, a couple hundred years.
Well, on his level, he was able to. The truth, yeah. I mean, on his level, he was able perhaps to incorporate that knowledge and not kind of be burned by it immediately. But we saw in this book a different explanation to those verses there. You know, and what we saw here was that that when God said, "On the day that you eat, you'll die," it was not really a punishment. It was actually it was actually a description of God's mercy, because if a person, you know, what God was saying is that I want you to perfect yourselves by not transgressing, and if you do, then you will remain in the Garden of Eden, and God will also give them eventually would have given them also the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But if they were to partake of it before its proper time, they would be transgressing. And then, if they were to go ahead and be eternal, they would never become atoned for that transgression, because death comes about because after the transgression, death atones for sin. Remember we saw this? Yeah. So God was actually saying, God was not really punishing them. What he was saying was that out of my mercy, yes, I'm warning you, don't partake of this experience prematurely, because if you do, that will be bringing mortality upon yourselves. Why?
Which is also kind of similar to this. It's not like a punishment that you can't see God. It's if you saw him, you would die.
That's right. It's not really a punishment. Yeah. Although the only thing is, like I'm saying, it seems from here that God did intend for them to partake of God had they attained that level. And after they didn't, immortality became necessary in order to purify people and get them back to that state.
But just because we die from if Moshe did see God and he died, do we see God after we die anyway?
Yes.
So
yes,
in a way, we are eventually going to end up seeing God regardless.
Right.
Just die for it.
That's right. So lo yirani adam v'chai, a person can't see me and live, which is also understood to mean, as long as a person is living, one cannot see the essence of God. After a person dies, then a person can start seeing the essence of God. So here he's talking about this idea of God's having mercy even on people who don't deserve it, and he calls upon these verses which he makes reference to in the Gemara and Brachos. I'm elaborating a bit on the source there, where Hashem says to Moshe, you can't see my essence, but you can extrapolate something about my essence based on my midos. And I was connecting that to the idea of tefillin and the spheros that we've seen, the upper 3 and the lower 7. Moshe wants to know, the Gemara says, why do righteous people suffer? And why do wicked people prosper? The Gemara goes there into several different explanations. Why righteous people suffer and why wicked people prosper. The first explanation is that it depends on a person's forebearers. A righteous person who suffers is a tzaddik ben Rasha. He's a righteous person who's the son of a Rasha. And a wicked person who prospers, he's a Rasha ben tzaddik. And the Gemara suggests that really shouldn't be an acceptable explanation, because a person should be judged for what he is, a tzaddik or a rasha, and it shouldn't depend on the parents. And we know that people are not punished based on the parents. So tzaddik ben rasha shouldn't have to suffer on that account. The Kabbalists explain that, and therefore the Gemara departs from that explanation and goes into a secondary explanation. But the Kabbalists say that first explanation is not rejected, because it's not referring to a biological son of a biological father, such that a righteous son would suffer because of his wicked biological father. Rather, the Kabbalists explain that it's talking about reincarnation. So that a tzaddik varado is a tzaddik ben Rasha, meaning a tzaddik who's got it bad, he suffers, is because he's the tzaddik, the son of a Rasha, right? Is talking about this lifetime, right, being a product of a previous reincarnation. So that the tzaddik ben Rasha suffers because he's a tzaddik in this reincarnation, which is actually preceded by his being a Rasha in a previous reincarnation. And in order to rectify and purify from the transgressions that were accrued to this soul from a previous reincarnation of Rasha, this person now, even in this reincarnation, he's a tzaddik, still has to suffer in order to make for that. And then the opposite would also be true, that the Rasha v'Toivla, meaning the Rasha who's got a good, who's identified as being the Rasha ben tzaddik, is not saying he's accruing the benefit of his biological father, but rather he is accruing benefit, he's deriving benefit from the fact that in a previous reincarnation he was a tzaddik, even though in this reincarnation he becomes a Rasha.
So his father is his past life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, what were you going to say?
Can you repeat that last part about the father becoming the past life?
You're just saying that that according to the Kabbalist understanding of this first explanation in the Gemara, the tzaddik viralo, the tzaddik who has it bad, who's really identified as being a tzaddik ben Rasha, tzaddik who's the son of a Rasha, is referring to, how did you put it?
I was just saying, is instead of like your father being your biological father, really your father is your past life.
Yes, yeah. The idea is it's referring to somebody who he's the son of himself in a previous, right? In a previous reincarnation.
Okay, is there an idea in Judaism, maybe not directly connected to this, where you don't receive punishment based on what your father did, but it's your duty to rectify your father's mistakes or something like that? Or like, if your father has certain personality flaws, do you have a duty to kind of, if your father's a really stingy individual, is it your duty to kind of undo that and be more generous? Or
like your biological father.
Like your biological
father. Yeah, that's probably tied into the next step that the Gemara takes.
Okay.
So the I don't know. Well, I'll try and tie in what you're saying a bit later. But the next thing the Gemara says, if I remember correctly, is that rather the tzaddik who suffers, a tzaddik who suffers is somebody who's not a complete tzaddik. A tzaddik who has a good is a complete tzaddik. Basically, the Gemara discusses 4 possibilities. A righteous person's got a good, a righteous person's got a bad. A wicked person's got a good, and a wicked person's got a bad. And it says that the righteous person's got a good is entirely righteous. The righteous person who's got it bad is not entirely righteous. The wicked person who's got it good is not entirely wicked, and the wicked person who's got it bad is entirely wicked. So that seems to make sense, each person according to the degree of either his righteousness or his wickedness. Gemara goes into, there's a bit of a discussion there about, why, who gets his reward where, because there's somewhat of a difficulty to say that a righteous person who's not completely righteous has to suffer, but a wicked person who's not entirely wicked prospers. It would turn out, therefore, then, a righteous person would suffer here and a wicked person would prosper. And neither of them are either completely righteous or completely wicked. So how is it? Yeah, certainly the person who is not entirely righteous and has some misdeeds is nevertheless a lot better than the person who's not entirely wicked and only has a few good deeds. So why is it that his very many great deeds and only a small amount of bad deeds ends up causing him suffering much more than the person who's got relatively small good deeds and a very large amount of bad deeds? If the place for reward is in this world, as it would seem according to the wicked person who gets his reward here, so why doesn't the righteous person get his reward here and is suffering? Right? And if you want to talk about the reward being in the world to come, so that the righteous person is going to get his reward in the world to come, so why don't we say the same thing for the wicked person? He should tremendously suffer here because of his great bad deeds, and enjoy a little bit there based on his good deeds, whereas the righteous person will get the full benefit of his good deeds here, and have to reckon with his bad deeds there. So it's a bit complicated in that respect, but one way of reconciling this is that God's judgment is perfect, so that God gives a person's reward in what that person decides to be his main world, because there are two. The righteous person, if you ask him, where's your main world, this or the next? He would say the next. So God says, okay, so we'll give you a reward there. But your misdeeds have to be reckoned with. Where are they going to be reckoned with? In this world. So he's going to end up suffering in this world to get the full measure of his reward in the main world for him, which is the next. If you go to the wicked person, where's your main world, this or the next? He says this. This is your main world? Okay. So this is where you'll be rewarded. You have some good deeds, they'll be rewarded for here. And he prospers.
It could be a test as well, right?
It could be a test.
How they'll handle their good deeds or their misfortune.
Yeah, and there's going to be a result. They're going to test. A test would result from all this.
But what about a tzaddik who still has like a really good life? What's their point of being here if they're a true tzaddik? Why weren't they just in heaven? Or
why don't they just expire? Yeah, maybe to help others. Yeah, you want to say that? Yeah. And they help others.
They're done through the kind of the wheel of incarnation, but they're just here to, pull other people along.
Yeah. Okay, fine. That's a good explanation. But getting to the conclusion of the Gemara, actually, I'll address your point first. I don't remember exactly every stage of the Gemara, but the point you're making is also relevant because at some point the Gemara says. It raises a contradiction. One verse says that children will not be punished on account of the parents. And the other verse says that the iniquity will be brought upon a person to the first and second and third generation. So Gemara's Kilu, make up your mind. They're two somewhat contradictory verses. In one case, the verse seems to indicate that children will not be punished for the parents. And the other, it says they will. So the Gemara says that the difference is as follows. Is that verse which says that the iniquity of the parents will not be brought upon the children is talking about when the children do not go themselves in the wicked ways of their fathers. So there's nothing that would connect the wickedness of the father to the son. And therefore, the iniquity of the father should never be passed on to the son, and the son should not be punished on account of that father's wickedness. However, the verse which says that the person's iniquity will be brought upon further generations is talking about where his children, for example, go in his own wicked ways. So they are reinforcing the ways of their father, and therefore they're punished not only for their own misdeeds, but also by the conscious decision to uphold the wicked ways of their father, which makes their punishment compounded, so that now they're punished not only for their own misdeeds, but that of their fathers as well. And the iniquity of the father is based on the children. So from there, I think we can deduce the point that you're making, which is that a person has to be aware and might have to reckon with the misdeeds of the parents, yes, if they don't make a conscious effort to correct it. And therefore, right, the children can, and I think that's what you're talking about, right? Did I understand you correctly? To correct, how did you put it?
To rectify.
To rectify, yes, to rectify the misdeeds of the parents. So that if a child is aware of the parents' misdeeds, they would be required to rectify in their own behavior those misdeeds. Number one, in order to prevent themselves from being punished by upholding the parents' misdeeds. And number two, in order to counterbalance any negative effect there might be on this parent. Because if the child goes in these good ways, by rejecting and repudiating the parents' bad ways, that in a way benefits the parent as well.
But if you're born into slavery, or you're born out of wedlock, like a bastard child or whatever, you don't have control over. That's not like a behavioral thing. You're just born into that due to your parents, and you have absolutely no control over that.
So are you talking about specifically the case of a mamzer? You're talking about like a biological?
Yeah, like that, or like a slave, like you're born into this.
Oh.
So you can't really like change your behavior to change, like, you know what I'm saying?
I think so. Behavior could be changed. Ideas could be changed, but status can't be changed. Exactly. So regarding mamzeros, and by the way, just to clarify, I'm sure you know that the concept of mamzer is not somebody who's born out of wedlock.
Yeah, born out of adultery.
Yeah, right. Because as being born out of wedlock is concerned, that's not an ideal situation, but it doesn't affect the person's status in any way. The Gemara says about that scenario, applies the verse which says, Me'uvat asher lo yuchal liskon. It is a perversion or a transgression which cannot be corrected. It's true. There are certain things that are beyond a person's control. If a transgression was done as a result of this, the child was a mamzer or mamzeros was born. So there's nothing that can do to change that for the whole person's life.
Do we have to kill his parents? If the temple's around, we have to kill his parents for adultery, right? If
it's a scenario where the death penalty could be applied, yes, but that's not always true.
For adultery?
I'm saying it's true that the death penalty is relevant for adultery, for example.
Yes.
But not every situation of adultery can as we learned in the morning, in every situation of adultery can the capital punishment be applied. There might not be witnesses. There might be kosher witnesses and all.
But the fact that the mother gives birth, which is evidence of adultery, is not enough. That's still not enough, right? You still need the two kosher witnesses, the warning, and everything.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the child would be punished for something their parents did that they had absolutely no control over. Like,
the child did.
Yeah.
The child had no control over that whatsoever, and therefore the Gemara says that that's a case of muvas asher lo liskon. Yes, like this transgression, this perversion, which can't be corrected in any way, other than the death of the child. That's all there is. That's what the Gemara says, and it discusses the case of David HaMelech, where he had relations with Bathsheba when she was still married, even though it turned out that retroactively, without going to the details of how, her husband died, and as a result of his dying, she actually retroactively became a single woman at the time that the relations with her and David took place. Because when a person would go out to war, they would write a get, which would take effect on condition that if they die, it would come into effect retroactively from the time they left home. So that once her husband was killed in battle, she became divorced.
Before,
from at a time before she was actually with David. So retroactively, she didn't commit adultery, but at the time, as it were, there was an adulterous act, and a child was born of that union. And the child became deadly sick, and David cried and tore his hair and wore sackcloth and fasted, all for this death child, all for this for this sickly child, that it shouldn't die. And everybody was wondering, there could be nothing better than the child die. It would erase the mark of this transgression. Well, nobody said anything, and David continued to mourn. And then when the child died, David became happy. And people, I think it's the Gemara discusses, why was it when the child was on his deathbed, David mourned, and when it died, he was happy? If he was upset about the possibility of dying, and a little more so when it died, and he was happy when it died, then why was he mourning when it was sick? So the Gemara was saying that David Melech, as long as the child was alive, right, cried and tore his clothing and fasted and was anguished on behalf of this poor child that it shouldn't die because of his transgression. But once the child did die, despite all of David's attempts to try and pray for its life, he saw that it was a sign that he was forgiven by God. And the child's life was taken, and the mark of this transgression and the mamzeros had been erased. Very difficult issues.
So the fact that you're born into a mamzera,
yeah,
would that just be in relation to your past life? Because that can't be attributed to your own doing. So it'd have to be through reincarnation. That's like a punishment.
Oh, I don't know. I've never thought about that. I mean, until now, I was just discussing it, without considerations to reincarnation. If you view this as a punishment on the child, and your question would be, what did the poor child do to deserve this? Then maybe the idea of reincarnation would come into play. It's a very interesting idea.
Born into slavery or born into any
right.
unfortunate.
So say somebody himself caused mamzerim, he did things which resulted in mamzeros. So maybe as a way of rectifying that, he was reincarnated, chas v'shalom, in the form of a mamzer. It was a way of rectifying the wrong that he did. Yeah, or might have treated people like slaves or enslaved people, or not treated his indentured servants properly. So he might be reincarnated into this status. The status of a slave can be changed. There's a way of changing that, but not regarding mamzeros. But to get back into this topic here more specifically, the point I was getting at is that the Gemara says there, concludes with the idea that in the end of the day, despite all of the Gemara's intentions to explain, this question as to why there are righteous who prosper and righteous who suffer, and wicked who prosper and wicked who suffer, the Gemara says at the end of the day, ultimately we can't know. And God says to Moshe, "V'rechamti es asher arachem, v'chanoisi es asher achon." I'll have mercy on those who I choose to be mercy towards, and I'll show favor to those who I choose to show favor to, by which the Gemara understands God saying to Moses, it's up to me. I decide, for reasons that are totally up to me, things that you can't know about, right? Why to have mercy and have favor over such and such a person. That was the answer. Moses wanted to know, what God are your ways? Why do the righteous suffer, the wicked prosper? And God's ultimate answer is, I decide. Because I say so. And that's what this is being referred to here as well. I arbitrarily, from your perspective, decide who to show favor to. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Otsar zeh lo'oisam she'enam hugunim. There is a whole repository set aside for showing mercy to people who themselves are not worthy and are not deserving of this mercy. Yesh oitzer chinunim. There's this chamber of chinunim, which means giving free forgiveness. Shekadosh Baruch Hu choinen v'noisen lehem matanas chinam. And God just seems to arbitrarily give people free pardon for no benefit or merit of their own on any count. And why is this? This has to do with our midah here. Asher nishbati lavosenu, which I swore to your forefathers, back in the text, the Fisha Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because God says, Hare yesh lehem schus avos. They have merit, the merit of their fathers. Ani nishbati la'avos, I swore to the fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that what? That God will not depart from their descendants. And God will not break his promise. He will provide for, save, and deliver, and redeem the descendants of the patriarchs. There is such a promise. Imken, im hi'iyos she'enam hagunim, even if their descendants, the Jewish people, are not deserving, any individual is not deserving. Yizku bishvil shehem mizera avois, shenishbati lehem. They're still going to be saved and spared because of the oath that God made to the forefathers. Lefichach anhilam vanhigom ad sheyituknu. Therefore God says, I will guide them and direct them until they become perfected. So he's saying some pretty interesting things here. Number one, he's saying even a person is not deserving of his own right whatsoever to any divine mercy, God does so in the merit of the patriarchs. There's a Gemara, I believe it's a Gemara in Shabbos, which there's a Tosos there, which talks about schus avos, the merit of the forefathers. And the Gemara says there, the Tosos say that, based on the Gemara, that tamus schus avos, that already in the past there was a time when the merit of the forefathers was depleted. What is this referring to? The forefathers were entirely righteous. They accrued great merit. That actual merit was depleted in order to favor the Jewish people throughout history, time after time, in order to save them from destruction. So, tamus schus avos. There's no such thing anymore about schus avos. However, what Tosfos says there is bris avos, the covenant with the forefathers. And this is understood to be something other than schus avos. Schus avos is when an individual or the Jewish people are spared by using up the actual merit that was accrued by the forefathers. That's been finished. That's depleted. The only thing that's left is the residual promise that God made to the forefathers. The merit of the Shvuah, not the merit of the mitzvos of the avos, but the merit of the oath that God made to them. And that's understood to be called not schus avos, but bris avos, the covenant that God made to the ancestors, to the forefathers. That remains. And that's what he thinks he's probably referring to here as well, is that in our times, there's no longer schus avos that we could say we're using their merit to be saved, but God is extending his promise to them, his promise to them not to destroy us. And this is understood through the following analogy, is that it's true that the individual here doesn't really have any merit to be saved on his own right. But what you do have is you have the avos, the forefathers in the source, who did have the merit, and the ultimate fulfillment of the promise, which has to be made. The promise has to be fulfilled. All of the steps in between are like interlinking links of a chain, so that you need an intermediary link, even though it doesn't have the merit of the forefather, and it doesn't represent the fulfillment of the promise either. But in order for the promise to be made, you need those links. And therefore, any individual or community of Jews who might not have any merit on their own right are still spared because they serve like links in the chain, which have no purpose other than they connect the first to the last. And that's the idea here of schus avos. Not schus avos, but really bris avos. The fulfillment of the promise to the forefathers, to fulfill the promise of the forefathers, requires showing mercy on any of the intermediary links, even if they themselves don't deserve it. That's one point. A second point is what he says here, that it's not that these people's transgressions are totally overlooked. No. But what the point is, even though these people ostensibly don't have any merit even to push off their punishment, they should be punished immediately. And if they deserve it even entirely, God nevertheless suspends their judgment. And what he does is, anhilam achiknu. God kind of guides them and directs them in the path until they become perfected. Whether it might be in this lifetime or in another lifetime through reincarnation. But God suspends the punishment for these very weak links, because links they are, and therefore they're needed to connect the first link, that's the avos, to the last, which is the fulfillment of the promise to them. And so this is the meter then. Asher nishbata lavoseinu. This is an attribute of mercy. The God is showing mercy on people only on virtue of the fact that he made a shvuah, an oath to the forefathers to fulfill their promise to him. And this enables people who are totally not worthy to nevertheless be deserving of rachamim. And this is like matanas chinam. It's like a free gift because the person is getting this mercy not on any merit of their own whatsoever, but only by virtue of the fact that there are links in this chain which are required for the fulfillment of the promise to the avos, which is not schut avot, but it's brit avot. It's the enabling of the fulfillment of the promise to the avos. Let's quickly just finish off this section before we have to break, where it's going to talk about how we have to try and incorporate this attribute ourselves. So too a person should be afim yifga b'reshoim, even if he meets up with wicked people. Al yitachzer kenegdam, he should not be mean and cruel to them, or yecharfem, or embarrass them. El yirachem alehem, rather he should show mercy on them and say, sof sof hem b'nei Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, they're sons of the patriarchs. Imem einam kasherim, even if they're not kosher. Avoseim ksherim v'agunim, their parents were kosher and were good, and therefore it would be a spite to the parents to treat them evilly, wickedly, and meanly. V'mevaze habanim mevaze avois, and somebody who disparages the children, that's like a disparaging the parents. Therefore, if you have these Jews who are not righteous people, they're not observant in any way, you shouldn't be mean and nasty and rough with them, but you should be willing to show them kindness, even though they don't deserve it at all, out of honor and respect to their parents, to their grandparents, all the way back to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And therefore, a person should say, "Ein ritzoni sheispazu avoseim al yedi." I don't want their predecessors to be disrespected because of my disrespect of them. But rather, he should overlook their transgressions and try and avoid embarrassing them and do what he can to help correct them and perfect them. Now, this needs some qualification because we find plenty of sources which do talk about trying to intentionally embarrass and to squash and to quell the wicked, to disempower them in any way that we can, and that would seem to contradict what we're talking about here. One way of explaining that would be that those sources might be talking about according to the strict law, and this would be talking about going beyond that in order to show the ways of mercy. Another explanation is that this would be talking about people who are wicked, lacking merit because they're evil, but not entirely evil. Only they might be transgressing because they can't control themselves. But they're not like conceptually or ideologically or religiously evil. They're just evil in practice because they can't control themselves. So such people we should cut slack to. The other type of people, however, who are, let's say, morally, ideologically, religiously, intentionally, heretically evil, those are the category of people that we should try and break and quell and humble and so forth and so on. And that distinction is going to be made in the final of these attributes, the 13th attribute, Mimei Kedem, which we'll see tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem.